This time on Militaria at the museum, we'll explore a flying boat that served as the US Navy's primary patrol bomber heading into World War II. Then, we'll tour a military citadel and learn how it transformed from a single wooden building into a fortified stronghold. Finally, we'll try to unravel the mystery behind the hidden location of a sunken German U-boat. Beyond museum exhibits lies a hidden realm of archived artifacts that hold the keys to unlocking intriguing stories from the past. Come along as I meet with experts at the Army, Naval, and Aviation museums, where I've been granted special access to pull back the curtains and reveal the secrets of their militaria. My name is Sandy Hiltz, and all my life I've been captivated by military history. Now, I have the rare opportunity to explore a collection of fascinating military artifacts on Militaria at the museum. The PBY Catalina is an amphibious aircraft originally designed to be a patrol bomber. It proved to be extremely versatile and successful, carrying out a number of duties during World War II while seeing action in nearly all operational theaters of war. The Aviation Museum has a PBY Catalina, and I'm going to see it with Museum President Mark People. Mark, I understand there's really quite a story behind how this Catalina got here to the museum.
There is. It's one of these epic stories of recovery, and ultimately now we're restoring it. It was recovered from Goose Bay, Labrador in the mid-'80s, and we ended up using a helicopter to pull it out, and there's quite a story behind that.
So Mark, what can you tell me about the crash that led to this Catalina being here at the museum?
Well, the crash occurred, they were hauling fuel to a Dewline site in Labrador. We're in Dewline at that point. They were building advanced radar bases across northern Canada. So EPA had a contract to haul fuel in, and they had basically crammed the aircraft full of fuel, large amount of tanks, and they would transfer the fuel. It was, I guess, at night, and it was fairly dusky, and they were coming across Labrador, and for whatever reason, the controls had been recently changed and refurbished, and a switch was switched, and all of a sudden they lost all power. So the PBY Catalina is an amphibious aircraft in this example here that was used for anti-submarine patrolling offshore and used by the Allied forces during the Second World War.
Mark, this is obviously quite an undertaking you have going on here. Is this all a volunteer-led restoration?
Yeah, it's 100% volunteers. We can always use a few more anytime anyone wants to help us with this project, because again, as you can see, it's pretty much stripped out at this point, and what we're going to do next is start cleaning various bits and pieces, then start reintroducing it. Obviously this originally was used in the US Navy and would have a number of different positions of radio operators, spotters, and so in that sense, we're not going to configure it to that configuration. We're going to want to configure it to how it crashed, which was a freighter configuration. As you can see, it's a lot of space in here to carry cargo and stuff like that. The PBY was designed to long-range patrol offshore mainly, and the ability to carry depth charges and various ordnance was another feature of this particular aircraft.
And they would have been dropping depth charges and things like that, is that right?
Right. I mean, principally they would have, on the wartime version, there was a front turret which had a machine gun in it, and there were two side blisters in the back that had the ability to put machine guns out the side of that. And then they would carry depth charges on the outboard and inboard wings right beside us here outside the aircraft, and they would be able to drop them depending on what the target they were attacking.
Mark, it's starting to come into use in the late 1930s. Who was it that designed and then manufactured the Catalina?
It was Consolidated Aircraft out of California. Obviously, lots of aircraft manufacturers are based out of California in the late 30s, at the beginning of the war. The Canadian version was actually called the Canso, obviously based off a stretch of water that runs between Nova Scotia and Cape Breton. That was the appropriate name for it. And so University and Canadian service is known as the Canso, whereas this particular one was a US-built one, and it's known as a Catalina, a PBY-5A. the A standing for amphibian.
Mark, for those of us who may not be aware of the Bismarck, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the German Navy at the beginning of the war had a large number of heavy battleships, big ships. One of them was the Bismarck. Bismarck was actually sighted by a pilot by the name of Cruikshank, who had noticed the Bismarck and actually spotted it just by sheer luck through clouds. And they were able to direct the task force to ultimately sink Bismarck and deploy the attacks to it. The Royal Navy went literally very strongly after it. And obviously, it was a major victory when they actually sunk the Bismarck at that point. The Catalina was deployed looking for it, and they actually found the Bismarck steaming in the Atlantic, and that led to the task force being brought to actually sink the Bismarck.
Mark, obviously, because we know the story of this Catalina, the plane had quite a role after the war. What were some of the other things it was used for?
This particular airframe actually was used by the U.S. Navy. Then in late 45, it actually became part of the U.S. Coast Guard, and then actually moved on to being converted to a passenger airliner and serving the Caribbean.
So is that sort of the legacy of these airplanes? Is this the last of the flying boats that are still around, or?
And they're active. I mean, these are the most, I guess, usable flying boats left. I mean, there are a number of flying boats left that are, well, amphibians. They're used for firefighting and things like this. And actually, post-war, a number of these were used for firefighting, and a large number of them actually. And so again, it's using something to something else it wasn't necessarily intended to do. And that's very much the option you can do with it.
And as you said, that sort of swords to plowshares mentality that so many of these aircraft went through.
And that's why they've survived this long, and that's why we're able to sit in essentially a wartime veteran aircraft, but it was repurposed and had that civilian life after, and now it's, well, slowly being restored, but and at the end of the day, we'll hopefully have an example of a PBY in EPA colors.
Mark, thank you for taking me through the history of the Catalina. It's been a real privilege to see the restoration in progress, and I certainly wish you best of luck with it. And I have to say, hearing the story of this plane, I think I might even be tempted to come and lend you a hand with this work.
Well, I'm sure, Cindy, we can let you buck a rivet or two. Certainly there's some that need bucking.
Sounds great.
The PBY was built in two distinct versions. One was a version which was just basically a flying boat with actually a beaching gear, but it would remain land and take off in the water. And then later they created the PBY-5A amphibian version, which meant they added a front nose wheel and two outboard wheels to land on any runway, as well as the ability to land in water. So it gave it a whole new functionality.
Coming up after the break, I'll visit the Army Museum to assess what impact a long series of construction modifications had on fortifying the citadel in which the museum is housed. I'm meeting with Kevin Robbins at the Army Museum to discuss the Halifax Citadel. What started as a small wooden redoubt around 1749 evolved into an impregnable citadel fortification that continues to stand as a symbol of the military strength of the city of Halifax. Kevin, having grown up here, I've of course spent much of my life gazing up at the walls of the citadel, but I'm really interested to hear more about its earliest forms, and I understand you have something to show me relating to that.
Yes, we've taken out of the archive a map drawn in 1761 by the British Army engineer John Bastide. Now, Bastide would be an integral part of the Halifax garrison and the elements of the siege warfare at Louisbourg, etc. So this is a hand-drawn map done in Halifax, which show the fortifications and the things he's responsible for as the engineer.
Kevin, I was wondering if you could take me back to what Halifax would have been like when this map was drawn.
Well, this is drawn in 1761. So the 7 Years' War is still underway. Now there'll be a big turning point in the next couple of years. The war will come to an end in 1763. But again, Halifax is very much a city at war. Halifax, again, is the major base of operations for what the British will call the army in North America conducting the war.
So this is one of the very earliest drawings of the fort itself, is it, Kevin?
Well, there are earlier drawings, but this is an engineer's plan. Okay? This is like an engineering document.
Right.
We see the original fort that is finished and prepared and complete by September 11th, 1750.
Do you mind if I take a closer look?
Oh, by all means, please.
Thank you. It's quite extensive, the gardens. It's quite something, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of sick people here in 57, and they just continue to use it throughout the rest of the war.
So this part here, this has all been dug flat. Has it
exactly
cut in
you
and
can see
out?
it here.
Right.
It says mining.
Right.
So what they would do is they put in explosive charges of black powder, they blow that up, and then they pull the debris away.
Ah, right.
The concept or the word fortress is not to be sort of interplayed with the word fort. These are forts, independent sort of military positions. A fortress is a series of fortifications that surround a civilian or a community, protecting the town itself or the city and the people that will live inside it. As in the later periods, Halifax Citadel, the fort on Citadel Hill as it's known, is to protect the west side of the approaches of the town of Halifax.
Kevin, what sort of impact would the fort have had on the British living in Halifax at the time?
The presence of the fort on the hill reminds people of the presence of the army. There's a lot of danger around the place, a great deal of uncertainty. So in 1761, despite those sort of victories on the continent of North America, the war's still going to go on for another 2 years, right? It went until 1763. So with that, Halifax, again, is a town that often lives on eggshells. And again, there's always this worry that there's going to be a task force come up from the Caribbean and lay siege to the town.
When they did start to develop the hill more, what sort of impact did that have on the history of North America?
Well, again, at the end of the 7 Years' War, and this is reflected in a lot of the sort of histories that have been written of the city, Halifax goes into a steep decline. As soon as the 7 Years' War is over, again, the money that could be made by the bucket or trunkful, supplying the Army and the Navy, the British build a very small, four-sided earthwork redoubt out of gabions and fascines. This fort will be gone by 1763. It'll be completely disassembled. They'll build, the British prior to by 1763, they've put in a small rectangular earthwork redoubt here made out of gabions and fascines, sandbags. In the opening phases of the American Revolution by 1776, this map shows us again the height of the fortification, what's on the hill, the garden, again it goes back to 1757, the lowering of the hill and the repositioning of earth that's taken off it to reshape the hill. And again, so with that, you're moving into this time when they will able and continue to transform the fortifications. But the hill still in many ways dictates the type of fort that's going to be up here.
So Kevin, the current iteration of the fort in which we're standing, what is that in response to?
Well, again, this fort, Fort Henry and Kingston on the New York border, the way you see the current trace of the walls, the way they're shaped, and the gates at the Citadel in Quebec, these are all built in the wake of the War of 1812.
Kevin, we talk about the American Revolution in the context of Citadel Hill. Did it play much of a role, or did it face much of a threat during that time?
By the time of the Revolution, we're moving into past this period.
Right.
There really wouldn't be anything left here in terms of what we see. And again, this is roughly the area where the second citadel will start with that small redoubt. So in the spring, that's March, so I think it's in May, the Army is still here, and you have them over on Camp Hill, the most of them, and they basically refight the Battle of Bunker Hill over on the west front of Citadel Hill. So they literally, the distance from, say, where Camp Hill Hospital is They would have been living over there on the hill, and they sort of organized camps. They call, that follows the system that's known as castramentation. With that, Howe, who is the commander of the British Army, who had been the commander of the army in Boston, he has the army basically refight that battle as a tactical on the backside of the citadel.
Now, of course, one of the more familiar parts of the hill that certainly doesn't have quite such a militaristic or colorful undertone is the clock tower. Who was it that had the clock tower constructed, Kevin?
Edward, Duke of Kent, when he's the district military commander here. He's a very clever fellow. Edward, of course, he's a member of the royal family. When he arrives, he has a significant effect on the city and its architecture.
Kevin, thank you very much. It's been an absolute privilege to be able to see such an early depiction of the fortifications here at the Citadel. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thanks for coming. Yeah, it's a great treasure, this.
It certainly is.
The Halifax Citadel, or the fort on Citadel Hill, begins with very simple construction of a log palisade fort. It's the first fort that's completed during the construction of the fortifications that will defend and surround the town of Halifax. It's a series of 3 buildings which are essentially barracks for troops. There is no blockhouse on the hill during the first period of the Citadel.
When we return, I'll learn of a German U-boat that surrendered at the end of World War II and was subsequently scuttled in a hidden location by the Royal Canadian Navy. U-boat 190 turned itself over to the Royal Canadian Navy when its crew was informed of Germany's surrender in 1945. I'm meeting with curator Jennifer Gamble at the Naval Museum, who is going to fill me in on how the Navy sank the U-boat and address the rumors that they intentionally lost the coordinates to the hidden location. Jen, I understand you have here at the museum a selection of materials relating to U-boat 190, which was involved with the Battle of the Atlantic.
Yes, I do. I actually have one of the depth gauges from U-190 in our Battle Atlantic room.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
Sure, it's on display here in our Battle Atlantic room.
Excellent.
A U-boat was a German submarine. Typically, it was about 250 feet long with a crew of 48 individuals and 22 torpedoes. U-boats were purposely made to hunt and destroy Allied ships. At the beginning of her career, she had a couple of hits and successful sinkings of Allied ships. In her final campaign in 1945, when she left Norway, her sole mission was head to the coast of Atlantic Canada, primarily around Halifax, which was a busy wartime port with a lot of major Allied navies coming in and out of it. Her orders were to identify and sink any merchant vessels and, of course, any Royal Canadian Navy vessels or Royal Navy vessels that they came across.
Jen, knowing that the rest of U-boat 190 sits somewhere off the approach to Halifax Harbor, it seems even more impressive that we have this piece of it, the gauge, sitting in front of us here today. How did this come to be at the museum?
I wouldn't want to call it a junkyard, but a collection yard of someone who collects wartime pieces and other naval-related items. We got word here at the museum that there were some interesting pieces that he had, and he asked our acting director at the time and a museum volunteer to come check it out, and they immediately identified that this piece was from U-190. She was commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy to be a training vessel. Our early submariners relied on British submarines and other submarines of the Allied forces to do their training on, because Canada did not have their own, unlike they did during the First World War. So for a couple of years, U-190 was used solely to train our submariners. Once that training time was done, U-190 participated in an operation called Operation Scuttle, which is where they ceremoniously painted her yellow and red, towed her out to a point just outside the approach of Halifax Harbor, and ceremoniously sunk her for target practice.
What do we know about the role of U-190 in the Battle of the Atlantic?
Well, the sole purpose of any U-boat during the Battle of the Atlantic was to sink merchant ships and, of course, naval ships. They were purposely made just to hunt and destroy.
Jen, in the last campaign of U-190, she famously sank 2 ships. One is the Esquimalt. What can you tell me about the Esquimalt and that other ship that she sank?
Well, she left Norway in April of 45, and while she was over here on the Atlantic coast, she sunk a British tanker, which was a major target and hit for the U-boat. And then, just by chance, she came across this Esquimalt in the middle of the night off the approaches of Halifax, and of course took advantage to take that target out. It was a sad loss for the Royal Canadian Navy because it was the last ship to be lost in the Battle of the Atlantic.
So off the approaches to Halifax Harbor, this occurred very close to the shore, did it really?
I actually have a series of charts down in the archive which describes the exact area that we're talking about, the approaches of Halifax and where these ships went down. I can take you down there right now to show you if you like.
Oh, I'd love to see those.
Oh, perfect.
Jen, we're obviously looking at a large swath of the Atlantic Ocean here, from North America all the way over to Western Europe and even down to North Africa. But what was the purpose and use of these particular charts?
Well, this map shows the region of the North Atlantic, which was the major operation zone for a lot of these U-boats like U-190 and the majority of the convoys leaving Halifax particularly. So it was a dangerous job crossing this North Atlantic stretch. And even for the convoys, because once they had gotten off the coastline, they had no protection from air coverage. And so you have this major body of water, which was called the Black Pit, where the majority of Allied shipping and ships were lost. Another map showing the coastline of Nova Scotia into Newfoundland, and these plotting lines are actually convoy routes. And so these maps were kept, of course, top secret, because if they fell into the wrong hands, the U-boats would know exactly which routes these convoys were taking. But as the war progressed, the U-boats actually would sit in stock convoys, and they would actually map their own routes of where the ships were going. And so it's a great depiction showing the common route leaving from Halifax and how they would get across the Atlantic and even between Nova Scotia up into Labrador.
Jen, during the time, I would think this would have been incredibly top secret information to have charts like this depicting the routes of those convoys.
Absolutely. If the U-boats knew exactly the routes of these convoys, I'm pretty sure more ships would have been lost and we might have lost the Battle of the Atlantic in the entirety.
Jen, I know when we're looking at this map here, it's a depiction of the Allied wrecks, obviously, that were sunk by the U-boats. But does this give us any clues as to where we might be able to go and see U-boat 190?
Well, when U-190 was scuttled, it's famously believed that it was scuttled by the minesweeper HMCS Esquimalt that she had sunk at the end of the war, which is actually right here near the approaches of Halifax.
Jen, I have to say it really is wonderful that we do have those few pieces still of U-190. It certainly helps to give us a tangible connection to that story. But I have to say, I think the most impactful thing that I've seen today certainly is this chart here depicting just how many lives must have been lost to those U-boats that were so close to our coast.
Absolutely, and it's, as you said, that tangible evidence of that event in history is what we really value here at the museum. So that gauge was on an enemy vessel that had human lives on board as well, that was fighting a war at sea that was very dangerous, and that unfortunately a lot never came back from.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for going through this with me today.
Oh, I'm so glad I got to share it. So after the war ended, U-190 was actually hanging off around the coast of Newfoundland. When the order came that the war ended, the U-boat surfaced and surrendered to the Royal Canadian Navy. She was then escorted to St. John's, Newfoundland, and then on to Halifax. U-190 was quickly commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy as HMCS 190.
Having special access to go beyond museum exhibits reveals some of history's best kept secrets and most interesting stories. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of military artifacts on another episode of Militaria at the museum.